I'm Joseph Bohinski. I'm the current Vice President of Sunday Assembly Detroit. I just wanted to welcome everybody here. We've got a great program lined up for everybody. So, for those of you who are here for the first time, we're Sunday Assembly Detroit. Our motto is that we are a humanist congregation that lives by goes by the phrase to live better, help often, and wonder more. This month we have one of our own members, Rob, who's going to be giving us our talk later. I'll be doing our gathering statement and address. Marty will be leading our moment of wonder, and then we will get into the thick of things. And then, of course, yes, everybody's favorite is the lunch. Can't forget that. So we gather here this morning to connect with each other, with nature, and with our humanist values. Being here together builds in our sense of community with open hearts and open minds over delicious food, as our ancestors have done for millennia. Let us remember that we have this one beautiful life, and today we're here to celebrate it. I wanted to start off my address with letting everybody know that this is supposed to be our Help Often month. That Sunday Assemblies are our umbrella, we exist as part of an umbrella organization. Our national level organization has decided that April is Help Often month. And during this week is the week that we're trying to get one of our new initiatives going that we hope will, come this time next year, we'll have a full-blown program for it. As I was, doom scrolling, as many of us have taken to do nowadays on YouTube, I was watching news events, burning Teslas, vandalism at dealerships, and then the algorithm offered up a video for me from Plato. And I was kind of like, okay, this is kind of not in the line of, where things are going. But then found out that Plato, I guess, had a lot to say about what happens when the oligarchs take over your city or your country. And there was a lot of useful advice for people, in community who, we have a lot more power than we often give ourselves credit for when we're dealing with things like, powerful governments. And it reminded me of this advice that my Uncle Walter gave me. It was kind of towards the end of his life, he was in his 90s. We were all sitting around at a holiday gathering. And he told me, and all those that were sitting around the table, it's you guys should always keep a garden. Regardless of how much money you make, how much, how important you are, how busy you are. His advice was, always have a garden. And I don't think I really understood his advice as a, little 18-year-old kid. Didn't know how to be property, didn't, have a dollar to my name. I didn't really understand that until now that I'm hearing things about, our current situation. And it connected to me with this video I saw, these, tumult that we're all experiencing. And I think I understood it. I think I understood his advice better because he was one of those people that went off in the war, World War II. And he and his brothers, they all served, fighting literal Nazis. And in that context, I think I understood more this idea of having a garden, having a safe place. Not only that, it was very patriotic So my idea for this garden initiative was kind of inspired by these, people who lived through World War II. The idea of a victory garden. I guess there was I read a stat that said that 40% of fruits and vegetables that people consumed during World War II were made by just individuals growing in their school or in their garden, in their backyard, wherever they could find something. There's a lot of benefits to it, a lot of help build morale, gave people something that everybody can do. And that kind of sparked this idea for me for our Help Often project going forward. I've been doing a lot of outreach with the American Humanist Association, been hanging out with some of their organizers on their Discord, and one of the other people there gave me this idea called a work mob, a way of organizing volunteers to tackle short-term volunteer projects. And I thought this would mesh perfectly well with something like a garden. And one of the things I was hoping to convince you was a worthwhile effort was something that we're all here in the temple right now. But they have their own garden initiative that they're working on. They're intending to plant a food forest. So one of the things I was hoping to do is to convince you, or at least some of you anyways, because I know we have quite a few gardeners here in the group. Can we go back a slide to the Discord invitation? So for those of you who want to get involved, I was hoping you might take the time now to scan our QR code here if you're not already in our Discord, to sign up. And I was hoping maybe we could talk in there about pulling together one of these garden worker mobs, as the AHA has come to call them. We have a lot of other things I've been unrelated to my address, but one of the updates I have been going through and actually making it a community space for all of us to use, to do a lot more bottom-up organizing as opposed to always trying to be doing it from the top down. So I was kind of hoping, if you don't mind taking a moment, want to get involved in that, I would love to see you in the server. Love to hear your ideas. We are also always open to other suggestions. This is just one thing that I know I'm personally capable of doing. So I've been gardening for some time, and I'd love to be able to help other people on their journey. How's that work for everybody? Anybody who wanted to able to get in before I move the slide? All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me ramble. We have an update. So those of you who know Steve, our current president, he has a new book out that he is selling at a discount to our members. He's going to donate part of the proceeds to our chapter here. And if you want, you have the book in front of you during lunch. He's willing to sign those books for you if that's something you're interested in. So feel free to go talk to him about the book. I look forward to reading it myself. And I suppose without further ado, I'm going to call Marty up to the stage for our moment of wonder.
Hi, good morning. So glad to be here again for a moment of wonder. This is great. I get to introduce a new little Sunday assembly segment for a moment of wonder. Let's see, could we advance the slide, Brett? Yes, Humanist Heroes. This is our new segment, or at least we're trying a new segment. So we're going to talk about humanist heroes for a couple minutes. A humanist hero, I think, is a person who does something for the benefit of other people and not simply for themselves. And a very small example of that, I think of Joe, who was just up here speaking. Last night he was ordering lunch for everybody today, and he realized he spent more money than we've allotted, and he was really concerned about that. And I thought, that guy did something really nice for everybody for no benefit to himself. I appreciate that. So in some small sense, that's a humanist hero. In a larger sense, for this conversation, could we go to the next slide? The timeline of humanity, about 250,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared on Earth. They didn't have language, they didn't have fire. It was a pretty measly existence. It was tough. And you look at where we are today, where there's selfie guy is the highest achievement of human beings. And I'm like, selfie guy is kind of funny, but actually selfie guy has it going on, right? Like, he's got a refrigerator and good food to eat, he's got sanitation, he's got a long lifespan, he's got a means to provide a living for himself that doesn't break his body into pieces. Like, it's pretty good that the greatest thing that we are mostly concerned about is our self-image, and this was a good opportunity too. I want to be selfie guy here, just for a minute. So, I love that, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that's the pinnacle of where we are as human beings, There's this spectrum where we started living in the dirt, and now we are that. And how did we get to that level? It wasn't always just by accident and happenstance, but there are dots all the way along that spectrum where people actually made a difference to the world, individual people. And so I want to talk about, I'll just pick a point on that line of an individual person who made a difference, and we'll talk about that person. And then, after I'm done talking about that person, I'm going to give you a little twist to the story. So, I just want you to pay attention. So, the person that I'm going to talk about is, next slide please, Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins. Okay, figured that was going to happen. So, right, there's one of two things that we're thinking. Either Frances Perkins, it's time she got her due at Sunday Assembly. Or, who is Frances Perkins? And it's the latter. I didn't know who she was until about 2 weeks ago. Frances Perkins was born in 1880. And that was 40 years before women got the nationally recognized right to vote in the United States. 40 years before. She grew up in a time totally different than the time we live in right now. She grew up, and actually she was a lightning rod for a lot of the things we appreciate about our modern society. Born in 1820, or 1880, she was raised during the Industrial Revolution. She's from Boston, Massachusetts, spent a lot of time in New York. Those were real industrial centers, full of sweatshops. We've all heard the stories. I think Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle back in those times about horrible working conditions, and she lived in those times. Prior to 1911, which she would have been in her 30s, working day for a factory worker could be 7 days a week, 13 hours a day, half-hour break every day, and there was no minimum age restrictions to who would be working in these factories. 7 days a week, 13 hours a day is a 91-hour work week. I can't even imagine, when do you go home and sleep? How do you take a shower? What if you have to commute to work? It's a grim existence. So that's what it was like. That's it, right there. Kids working. I think that might even be, those look like spools of thread. That might be a garment factory. No shoes, working, it's tough, right? So in 1911, a pivotal tragedy happened in New York City. Yes, this is it. It was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, and it was a 10-story building in the garment district in New York, and it caught on fire. And back in those days, because you didn't want your employees to go take a potty break, something, or go take a break, get some fresh air, all the doors are chained shut, all the stairwells are chained shut. So nobody could get out of, and if you can imagine what a fire in a garment factory would look like, it's full of cotton and strings and dust in the air, paper cutouts. It It was a terrible fire. 154 people, it says there, killed. Other sources, 140. A lot of people killed, and very dramatically. I mean, 154 killed in skyscraper factory fire. Others leaked to death. Like, people were jumping out of the windows because that was a better option than burning to death. It was shocking. It shocked the whole state of New York. And in the middle of that shock, Frances Perkins got to work. And she was instrumental in organizing a lot of initiatives that then became law. And New York was very progressive in the Industrial Revolution in having laws subsequent to this for fire safety, factory inspections, workman's compensation. Prior to this, if you got injured at work, it was, I'm sorry, just please move along. And the Industrial Code. And the Industrial Code is really interesting because that meant that these agencies of government could make regulations that had the force of law. And that was very unusual at that time. And so, the oligarchs, I think, call that the beginning of the deep state, right? But she was instrumental in making all of these things happen, completely turned around what it was like to be a common factory worker in the state of New York. Can I have the next slide, please? In 1933, she got called up to the major leagues. She went from being this dynamic person in the state of New York to working for President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the New Deal president, right? A lot of great things that we take for granted and appreciate today came out of his administration and his relationship with Frances Perkins. By the time she was the Secretary of Labor, she became the Secretary of Labor. She was the first woman ever to be a secretary for any president. So a pioneer in that regard too. When she was done with her tenure, we had unemployment insurance nationally. We had the 40-hour work week. We went from a 91-hour work week to a 40-hour work week. She was instrumental in making that happen. We had a national minimum wage, something that had never been considered. I'm sure it was very controversial. We had the abolition of child labor, and she brought something to life called old age insurance, which we know as Social Security. Like, she was the person who wrote the template for that, and this is the guy who made it happen. So these things are in the news a lot today, right? Social Security, things like that. We hear about it all the time. Through Frances Perkins is really the beginning, I think, of modern times as we know it, where participating in the work sphere is beneficial to the common man as well as to the person who owns the production or who owns whatever. We all benefit from all of these things. This is our social fabric. I grew up in this. I take it for granted, honestly. Now, here's the twist I wanted to get to you. The reason that I want to talk about Frances Perkins in this time is I heard about her through an article I read a few weeks ago by this author. Here, could you change the next slide? I don't know if anyone's familiar with Heather Cox Richardson. You guys know Heather? She's live action right now. She is a professor in Boston College. And she writes an article every day. She's got 2.5 million subscribers. There's a few of them here in the room. And she is a big fan of these common goods that the common man has. And she writes a very insightful, very detailed, very well-researched article daily on the challenges that the social fabric is facing, the erosions that are occurring to it, things that we might do to help protect it. She really is brilliant. She's a modern hero, and she fits the definition. I don't know what the benefit now. You can subscribe and you can support her through this, but colleges and universities are getting letters all the time saying we're going to pull your funding unless you align with our ideals. And she's a college professor. This is her living. This is her profession. And she's at risk now because she's definitely contra state of affairs that are occurring. So if you can click to the next one. This is her newsletter, so Letters from an American. I wanted to introduce you to it. If you don't know who she is or you haven't subscribed, it's so easy. You just Google Heather Cox Richardson subscription, and it will take you to this page, and you type your email and subscribe, and you're going to get a brilliant newsletter every single day. So, next slide, please. So, I have introduced, she's actually the one who wrote about Francis Perkins and made that a colorful story and the origins of our modern social benefits. So, there is a humanist hero from 80, 90 years ago. There's a humanist hero of today. I hope that you find some inspiration in that. Joe's another humanist hero. And I think that was my job, is to show you some humanist heroes. So, thank you very much.
Rob is making my job very easy today, given that he's an actual member of the congregation here. I don't really have a huge amount of introducing to do, most of you already know. So, everybody give a warm welcome and round of applause for Rob Halsey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Here at Sunday Assembly, we mentioned before, our motto is live better, help often, wonder more. Well, I'm hoping that some of you today are going to take a journey and wonder with me. Right now, I'm wondering, how many of you were raised with religion? Show of hands if you're comfortable. Okay. I certainly was. Okay. That foundation became a strong part of my identity for many years. In fact, 30 years ago, if somebody would tell me that I would eventually abandon my faith and move from the right to the left politically, I'd ask them what they were smoking, because that just wasn't going to happen, right? But here I am. How does that happen? I'm hoping to share my story today so that we might be able to find some empathy for others that have a different story than what we do. I don't want to speak for anybody else who has been a part of my journey. Their story is theirs to tell, but I did get permission from my family to be able to share the photos and some of the stories that appear later in this presentation, but this is important, just so you understand the context where we're at today. So I want to go all the way back to 1977. I was 4.5 years old. My single mother recognized that I was a self-starter, and she had me tested at the local public school for a chance to start kindergarten a year earlier than normal. I was accepted for that entry, and I did well academically, but I had some early issues with socialization in the classroom. After that year, a close friend of my mom suggested that I would do well at a conservative evangelical school where she sent her children to. Mom worked hard enough to save enough money to enroll me there, and on August 28, 1978, I started first grade faith Christian school at the age of 5.5. Before stepping into that school, I had no concept of a God, religion, salvation. I was a kid. Pastor Jim, though, he spent some extra time with me because I was the new student who didn't attend the church there. Day one, Pastor Jim told me about this guy named Jesus. He explained that every person who has ever lived was sinful, naturally broken beyond repair. Without the blood of Jesus to pay the penalty for that sin, the consequence was death and torture by fire in eternity, even for a 5.5-year-old like me. I asked Pastor Jim, how do you know all this? He said, well, this book, the Bible, tells you so. So Jim read some verses from that Bible. He showed me how I could easily avoid that fate, according to him. All I have to do, just accept Jesus to come and live within my heart. Wait a minute. How does that happen? I'm 5. I told him, that's like weird. What do you mean? He said, well, here's all you have to do. You pray this prayer. All right, I'm going to try that. So he prayed the sinner's prayer, and some of you are probably familiar with that. Gave me a big hug afterward. Hey, you're going to live together in heaven with me and all of the other. Okay. So that's where it started. Right? My indoctrination started very young. I literally had the hell scare. I didn't want that. So at some point, we started attending a church that's associated with that school. While I was at that church, my mom met the man who would marry her in 1980 and adopt me in late 1981. After they married, I continued to attend that Christian school through the 6th grade. That school, which used the self-paced ACE curriculum, or Accelerated Christian Education, the church was very conservative and very politically active. They had this Christian nationalist world. And to give you an idea about that, one of my earliest memories from that Christian school was carrying a sign at the Michigan State Capitol in Lansing. It read, "No tax dollars for abortion." I'm 7, 8 years old. I don't know what abortion is, but I knew I wasn't for it. Staff and students there, they had this dress code. And they were encouraged to wear the colors red, white, and blue. We pledged allegiance every morning to not only the American flag, but also to the Christian flag, and also to the Bible. Every morning. I did well academically, but I had some trouble in that school because I hadn't learned some of the basic social skills to interact with others. It was all self-paced. The school staff, most of whom did not have college-level education, they weren't certified teachers. They were simply didn't know how to deal with somebody like me. I was just a curious child that got into trouble a lot. The summer between my 6th and 7th grade year, my parents received a letter that rocked my world. I still remember the first line to this day. After much thoughtful prayer and consideration, we have decided that Robert will not be allowed to attend Faith Christian School in the fall. I later learned that my parents were kind of less than desirable, if you will, because both parents were on their second marriage. Coupled with my lack of social skills, that just meant I did not have a chance there. Okay, we'll go to the next one, please. There we go. My parents then enrolled in the local public school, where I was in for a big shift, as you can imagine. I still did well academically. I got mostly A's and B's, but I still struggled really to fit in socially. My lack of social skills and self-control caused me to be bullied to the extent that I hated going to school. I couldn't figure out why Jesus, who I prayed to, just like I had been taught, wouldn't make this bullying go away. Can we go to the next one, please? Our family also found a new fundamentalist evangelical church to attend. When I told the youth pastor about my problem of being bullied, here's what he tells me: control your tongue. He said, go to James chapter 3, verse 8. Here's what it says. It says in part, "No human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison." For a 7th grader, 8th grader, that was not good. I was struggling because I felt like Jesus could help. That's what I'd always been taught. But it just wasn't happening. I was then encouraged by a middle school math teacher to try out for the school musical that was going on at the high school. I tried out, I got a part of the play. And I finally found that healthy way to release some of the excess energy that caused me to fail with general social skills. Several of the people in that church youth group, they were also part of that musical, and I thank Jesus for that, right? I prayed as often as I could. I wanted to remember, hey, you've got to confess your sins, trust that Jesus is going to save you from that eternal hell. We'll go to the next one, please. So by the time I graduated from high school at age 17, I was so indoctrinated with that faith, convinced of my sinful nature, I knew I had to go to a Christian college. So I selected a small liberal arts college here in Michigan, and I learned a bit more about Jesus. Got a decent education. I majored in communication arts and sciences, and I got a minor in sociology. I feel like it was a good liberal arts education. But there was also a good dose of this politics. It's kind of espoused by what you're seeing on the screen right there. And that area of Michigan is notorious for very conservative politics. I also had the opportunity while I was there to experience life on my own, not living at home. While at that school, I became close with 3 other Christians, and those friendships remain to this day. I had many firsts, including some screwing around on campus that was certainly frowned on by college staff. So, wait a minute, what do we have here? What's the next one? Really? Rob, political manual? Come on! That was it though, because I mentioned politics before. that was where I became a big fan of Rush Limbaugh. And I really started to gravitate to that message that I was being persecuted as a young white man. I slowly started to believe the rhetoric that was coming from Rush about newly elected President Bill Clinton and the Democrats. I probably took on that label of conservative Republican. I gravitated to his message that I was being persecuted as a straight white man. I didn't know about the term cisgender at that point. Right? Parts of his show that aligned with what I regularly was hearing in the church pulpit. Homosexuality is a sin. It was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Stupid stuff like that. Rush didn't have any kind words for anybody that was black, Latino, gay, transgender, or a part of any marginalized group for that matter. But he apparently carved out an exception for then recently confirmed Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, because Clarence Thomas married Rush in his second wife. So apparently he was okay. That line between religion and politics for me was really starting to blur. Can we go to the next one, please? I graduated from college. I knew I wanted to make a career of helping other people just like Jesus wanted me to do. I married my college sweetheart, took on a part-time job at a local radio station, and a second job at a local retail store. I love radio, but I soon learned that, it's hard to make money in that business. It's notoriously unreliable. There's format changes all the time, stations getting bought up. It's hard to make a living there. So when I was offered a civil service job in November of 1994, man, I was happy. I had my degree in communications. I thought that I was ready to change the world. But what I found was I didn't really know how to communicate with other people. The times, they truly were changing. Can we go to the next one? Thank you. My first wife was all about the faith and was happy to be with somebody that was Christian. Unfortunately, our marriage dissolved in early 2001 when I realized we both had life goals that were different. And there was no possible way that they were going to be resolved. Surprisingly, faith didn't have anything to do with our divorce. We were just different people. I wasn't happy and I knew that something had to change. Despite the pain of that divorce, I felt like my life was going to make a turn for the better. And I'm going to come back to that quote here in a little bit. Okay? So soon after, you see I've got some personal and professional changes, right? I married a wonderful woman with 2 children who would become my partner for life. She also had a faith background, but wasn't nearly as strong as mine was. We go to church occasionally with my stepchildren. And personally, my life was indeed good. Professionally, the first 10 to 12 years of my career was about learning how to better communicate with people instead of talking at them. You know what I mean when I say that? Big difference, right? I had to learn. And I got better. In 2005, the administrator of my worksite actually recommended that I attend a diversity conference with the end goal of becoming a diversity facilitator. At that time, the term DEI, that really wasn't part of the narrative in the mainstream. And at first, I was really on it. I'm thinking, this is going to be great. But then I started to think, wait a minute, why do I want anything to do with diversity? According to Rush, that's just a means to stick it to the white guy. Well, ultimately, I attended that conference with an open mind, knowing I could always back out a little bit later on. But that diversity conference, I'm here to tell you, was the beginning of my shift in worldview and in philosophy. I learned about the strength in what happens when people with different views come together to solve a common problem. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could contribute to something professionally that's going to have a lasting impact long after I'm out of that job. I jumped in with both feet, doing what I could to encourage new employees to think about what can happen when people are able to draw strength from the variety of authentic personal experiences. I still considered myself a strong evangelical Christian despite lack of church attendance at that point. But I learned the high school acquaintance of mine had a large church in the area. We started attending that. And during the church membership class, someone asked if women could serve as a pastor in the church. The man running the class said, no, women and men have different gifts. Okay, so the role of pastor is reserved for men. He also cited a verse of Timothy that said, I don't permit a man or any woman to teach or have authority over a man. And that answer just didn't sit well with me. really didn't sit well with me, especially my wife and stepdaughter in the same class. From a very young age, I was indoctrinated. You don't question the church teachings. You don't do that. Right? Even if you don't understand, that's got to be a part of God's perfect plan. That was what I was told. But after sitting through that membership class and then ultimately becoming a full church member, it started becoming more uncomfortable. I tried to push through it. I've still got this faith. I want something here. Right? It's a little different there. Can we go to the next one, please? 2011 comes along. I made a career change. I was still a civil servant, but it was going to be in a different division from where I was working. And over the next several years, that new job really allowed me to further broaden my perspective. At the same time, I was starting to lean in a more progressive direction in politics, making a conscious effort to understand the perspective of people that maybe didn't think like me, look like me, talk like me. I had long since stopped listening to Rush Limbaugh and others like him because I'm learning so much with these diversity conferences that I'm facilitating. Right? The perspectives that were shared there, particularly by women and by people of color, helped me to see where, hey, my worldview needed some work. Right? I began to empathize with other people who were different from me in some way. We'll go to the next one, please. 2016, I realized that what I had been taught about religion and believed about politics didn't mesh with what I was seeing in the real world. I didn't like what I saw the Republican Party becoming. No room for moderates in the party. We're absolutely obsessed with defeating anything that the Democrats or President Obama put forward. This was especially notable with the Affordable Care Act. How could anybody want to repeal basic health care access? Yet, Republicans in the Senate led an effort to do just that. When it took 3 Republican senators to join with the Democrats to defeat that repeal, I knew, you know what, I can't be a Republican. That's when the term cognitive dissonance started to come to my mind. You can see it here. Right? I figured there's something that just isn't matching up. So I want to go to the source. I decided to go back to the Bible and see if I could find some answers to what's going on here. Okay, so here's the cognitive dissonance with politics. Can we go to the next slide? Here's what I found. I hope to find some clear answers, but I found a lot of contradictions. For example, some of the Bible stories, right? The women who discovered Jesus' tomb, either they told his disciples about what they found, or another account says they didn't tell anybody because they were scared. If nobody could see God, which is what's printed there, how was it that Abraham and Moses were both able to see God? When I looked at these contradictions, and then I started to see some other stories that were in the Bible that just didn't make sense. They can't happen. Right? You've got a donkey talking to a dude. Can't happen. Right? Multiple people being raised from the dead. No, can't happen. You've got the sun stopping in the sky in the middle of the day and staying that way for an entire day. It's not going to happen. It felt like that clear worldview and that clear window that I saw the world through was getting shattered. Like, what are we going to do with this, right? We're never taught in church, as you can imagine. And these stories portray the Bible, the God of the Bible, as a horrible monster. There's stories of murder and rape that were condoned by God or allowed by that God. In fact, that same God mandates that a rape victim must marry her attacker. Not cool. Some apologists say, oh, those are Old Testament stories. You don't have to worry about that. What's important is what's in the New Testament. Okay. Start looking through there, and that's where you start to see the misogyny, specifically with the Apostle Paul. And even aside from that, there's other stories that you can see, like the one that's on the screen right here. I'm reading this. That's where my mind is actually blown. Jesus wasn't the peacemaker that I always heard that he was. He comes to tear families apart in his name. It's right in front of me, but it just doesn't seem right. Didn't seem right at the time. We'll go to the next one, please. What I concluded after doing that study was the Bible doesn't stand up to critical analysis, supported by some type of evidence. If it's the word of that God, and that dude makes mistakes. I got more of that cognitive dissonance that was going on. If this God is supposed to be omnipresent, omniscient, benevolent, why is there so much evil in the world? So much bad stuff that he could prevent? That cognitive dissonance was real, so what did I do about it? Well, I had more self-acceptance at that point, but change is still hard for human beings. Right? It's like Dr. Bill Miller's quote that was up there earlier. It says, "It is paradoxically when people experience acceptance, they are free to change." I'd done the homework. I accepted what came of it. And once I put everything together, I made the difficult decision to abandon my formerly strong Christian faith. Let me go to the next one, please. This is what I love talking about, folks. Because one thing that those evangelical churches do, they provide a sense of community. Upon abandoning that faith, I no longer had that, and I really felt alone. I knew that I was going to need something to replace that part of my life. Without faith, I feared that I would lose my evangelical Christian parents, my siblings, my wife, my family. But despite my fears, I knew I had to share my deconstruction with my wife. I didn't lose her. In fact, she is here with us today. I also started to listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts. You see David Smalley there. Dogma debate. He would respectfully challenge his guests on their dogmatic beliefs. He would use what I now know as the Socratic method, or in accordance with Rappaport's rules, or some people call them Dennett's rules, where you've got some things that you're really trying to understand that other person. David wasn't what I expected from an atheist. And after all, I'm going through my entire life, atheists are evil. Oh, I just want to rebel against God. Well, David Smalley also talks a lot about the logical fallacies, and that inspired me to learn quite a bit more about those. The one that really comes to mind is Pascal's wager. We can talk about that later. I don't want to discuss it now necessarily. But he called himself an agnostic atheist. He doesn't believe in any of the gods or God that has been presented over time. There's no evidence, is what he says. But he leaves open the possibility. That really resonated with me because I was reasoned out of my formerly strong faith by simply looking at reality. What is versus what I want. Sometimes those aren't the same. A virgin birth can't happen. A donkey can't talk to a girl. So in addition to dogma debate, I learned of other podcasters which viewed current events through the eyes of an atheist. There's another one, right? Seth Andrews, a friendly atheist. He was like a breath of fresh air to me because he and I share a lot of things in common. He was a broadcaster for years on Christian radio. He also went to an ACE Christian school as a kid. He also eventually abandoned religion. There was another one, right? A friendly atheist here. You see Hemant Mehta. He has a co-host, Jessica Bloomke-Bright. They look at current events more through a secular lens. How does this affect us? There's a lot of things with Christian nationalism that the two of them look at. Those pictures that you saw there, those are pretty similar. You see those badges that are on our necks there? Something called Baja. Can we go to the next slide here? Because this is where the rubber meets the road. I got to meet both of them at Baja. But there's a couple of other people that I met at Baja as well. Steve, Austin, saw him earlier. Okay, yeah. Right. I got to meet them in 2002, and I was just kind of lamenting. I was talking to Steve, hey, I really have a hard time finding some type of community. It's like, well, we got Sunday Assembly over here. Right? Oh, okay. So, going to Baja and knowing what they had there, introducing to Steve and Austin, now we get to where we're at today. Sunday Assembly Detroit. Once I made the decision last year to come and check it out, I knew, hey, I have found my people. Woo! Unity. Yes! So let me wrap up here. I'll go to the next slide if we can. How do we conclude this? Because now I've got the sense of community. Right? I'm moving in the right direction. You can see the quote here from Michael Jr. When your why, when you know that, your what becomes more impact. You know where you're going. So what I had to do was figure out what is my why. And I did that. It was very simple for me. It's do the right thing for the right reason. Okay, that seems pretty simple. Yet there's a lot of pieces that are a part of that. When you dig into the what, it gets a little deeper. So let's do that real quick here. Right, my first of those is finding out what a secular humanist was. I didn't know what was going on with that. I didn't hear that term until I started listening to some of the podcasts. But what I found was my principles professionally and personally very much aligned with what is on the screen here. I'm excited about that worldview, but I still don't like having a lot of conversations around religion or lack thereof with my colleagues at work. You know what it feels like sometimes if you're being proselytized to somebody. I don't want the reverse of that to be true. But I do make exceptions when I've got colleagues that have become personal friends, and I know that it's safe to have those conversations. Whole different matter. So that is one thing. That's my what. There's another one. Another piece of the what for me is empathy. Professionally, I learned a way of being with people that's called motivational interviewing. Anybody familiar with that, by the way? You? Okay, good. It's a way to help affect behavioral change from other people, and it's different because it evokes their reasons for change instead of me telling them, hey, don't do this, do that. You try to learn and understand from that other person. They make their own decisions. In learning to communicate with other people in this way, I can better understand other people and their perspectives. I was trained in MI shortly before I deconstructed my faith, and I found that this is really my authentic way of being with people. Empowering people is the right thing for the right reason. And as such, yeah, I'm all in with that. Okay. Here's another one here. There's some principles. I have decided I wanted to live by the following principles. Okay, they're going to pop up on your screen. That first one. It can be hard, yes? It can be very hard. But what I've learned is everybody has a story. I don't know everybody's story. Everybody doesn't know my story. We don't know a lot about each other sometimes. So being able to learn from somebody there, that's a good thing. That second one, how do we do that? Well, be kind to them. Meet others where they're at and not where you are. Let me ask, is there a difference between being nice to somebody and being kind to somebody? Is there a difference there? Being nice is very easy. Hey, how you doing? Being kind. Hey, how are things going? You really want to know? Yes. It digs in just a little bit deeper. So when I say be kind, it's a little bit deeper than just being nice. Okay. And third, justice, fairness, and equity matter. When I see injustice, unfairness, inequitable treatment of others, I need to speak up. Right? And that includes racism, sexism, women's health care, abortion rights, transgender rights. Whatever it is, I'm passionate about those DEI issues. That's something that directly came from those conferences that I facilitated, learning about them. And then the last one there, make it count. I want to make it count for something now, rather than waiting for whatever stuff is later on in heaven, if you will. I want it to matter now. So when somebody is true to themselves, there might be a price to be paid. And I'm comfortable with who I am. I haven't yet worked up the courage to tell some of the members of my family. Right now, I don't believe that they're Christian. There's some siblings, particularly. I desire the peace that comes from trying to accept and understand where they are at. But I'm learning to understand that sometimes maybe it's just going to be an absence of conflict is the best of it. I'm okay with it. The flip side of that is that sense of liberation that comes in when you become your authentic self. I may feel alone at times. I'm not. When I initially talked to my wife, she also expressed doubts about the Christian God, even though we both been going to church. I'm not going to speak for her, but I will say that she has been nothing but supportive of me and my journey. And she's here today, as well as my daughter, so I'm here today. I'll tell you this too, there's another friend of mine from high school. We performed in musicals. She's here today. Her husband. Friends that I talked about, but also the band, they're here today. And here's what's most important, folks. The Assembly community, you are all here today. I can tell you, I can continue to study and attempt to live my life ethically and doing all those things, the right things for the right reason. But I also realize I don't have to be a Christian to be one. In fact, I consider myself now, like we saw earlier, a secular humanist and an agnostic atheist. I don't make a positive claim that there is no God. What I do say is I haven't seen enough evidence. And I love what David Smalley talks about with that. He says, I don't know what evidence would make me believe, but if he's there, he does. Yeah, right? Somehow, if it's there, I should be able to find it. One more thing here, my family, right? The most important. My family means everything to me, and I do what I do because of my family. Like I mentioned, my turn, it took a left turn, right? But if I can't be honest with myself in that journey, how can I possibly expect others to be honest? So I want to give you one closing thought here. I think you'll like this. Anybody like Ernie Harwell?
Yeah.
Back in the day, right? I grew up a fan of the Tigers. Listening to him and to Paul Carey on the radio, we didn't have the broadcast because we lived out in the country where we didn't get that very often. But listening to them on the radio was a treat. And I saw this quote on a Fox tribute to him on his death several years ago. And in fact, that quote brought me to tears while I was watching the broadcast. I had to actually pause the DVR. I wanted to make sure I wrote it down. I want to be more like Ernie Harwell. I choose to be kind. And I'm telling all of us to do the right thing for the right reason. Thank you for sharing my story and being a part of my community. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Rob before we move on to the next?
And aside from, I assume you say, you would say kindness, if we have friends and family that we want to help on this discovery, like what would you recommend?
The biggest thing that I can recommend if somebody else is genuinely interested is try to understand their perspective first. And then if you have something to offer or something that might contradict what they're giving you, make sure that it's safe to do that. I do like what they do with some of the street epistemology, where we talk about how confident are you that your belief is true on a scale from 1 to 100. And if it's 100, maybe there's no point in having that conversation. But if it's less than 100, well, what's it going to take to make it a little higher, or what might convince you otherwise? But making sure, first of all, that those spaces are safe to be able to have those conversations. Does that help?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
It's less of a Q&A and more just a thank you, because like your experience has really mirrored, my own and my wife's. We were kind of in the same boat and the same thing, and it's nice to kind of share experiences and all.
Thanks, Wes. I appreciate that.
I identified with you in several different ways, but I was on the opposite side. My dad was a socialist and fought in Spain, in the Spanish Civil War, was a personal friend of Ernest Hemingway's. Ernest Hemingway did write him up. And listening to you, I don't know how to describe it, but I identified it differently. We lived kind of a socialist life. My dad almost threw me out of the house when I joined the Oakland County Young Republicans. Okay, what happened to you? But I understand where you came from, but I was raised similar, but on the other side. And I appreciate where you come from. I was very interested in what you said. And you deserve a big raise, whatever you do. We're going to pay a trip to Jamaica. We're not going to go cheap.
Isn't it wonderful when you hear something like that? Does it have to be religion that is the thing that is uncomfortable? Maybe it's politics. Maybe it is some other worldview. But hopefully to build those bridges and get a better understanding is where I really try to be.
Mine's also more of a comment. I also saw a lot of my journey in yours. It wasn't exactly the same. I didn't come to know religion until my grandparents took me in, my parents, when I was chink in the armor, like, there's like, it seems like there's like one inflection point where like, something makes you question, and then you kind of extrapolate. And I went to a public college, and so it happened a little sooner for me. I had friends, I went to a Lutheran middle and high school, and I had friends trying to convince me to go to Concordia, and I was like, I'm kind of done with like, you know, religious schools, and at that point I still like considered myself to be Lutheran. But it was gradual, but it started in high school. I went to an ELCA Lutheran church, which is like a liberal Lutherans, like we let women be pastors. And I went to a Missouri Synod Lutheran school. And the thought for me was, how does like my little section of a religion among thousands, like how can we claim that our rules are the right ones? And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. Well, or the beginning. But I just want to say I appreciate you sharing your story a lot.
Appreciate that. So you get that little thread that's there, and you pull on that little thread, and that comes out just a little bit. It isn't going to be too long where that sweater or that shirt is ruined, because you're going to pull all those threads away. Just a very slow thing.
Is that kink in the cognitive dissonant armor?
Yeah, it really is.
Rob, if it's not too personal, as you know, I've told my own parents I'm also no longer religious. And I'd love if you could weigh in on how accepting are your parents these days of your current situation.
I would love to have a conversation with you outside of this with that.
By the way, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very relatable. I do have a question for you, just in terms of your personality is, if you ever, or had it ever occurred to you where, before you know where you are, who you want to be with, what is right for you, what's working for you, I guess there must be a time where everything was not aligning, you have a lot of questions, you wonder where this could lead to. How do you handle the emotions, your feeling, your thoughts to just get to, together as a piece and then keep moving? What helped you to move forward?
Yeah. And it's really tough with that because I'm not usually really good with emotions. I mean, I can share emotions, but if I'm scared, which I truly was at that point, I really kind of pushed a lot of that stuff aside. And I didn't deal with it maybe as best as I could. I caused myself a lot of stress. Therapy would have been very helpful at that time. Fortunately, still, good conversations with my wife, that really kind of opened the door to make sure, okay, good, I have a safe space. But beyond that, I probably would have benefited